Mark Rush Jr., partner at Prodigy Search. As part of our Prodigy Search Presents interview series, we're speaking with a few members of our Diversity and Inclusion Board of Advisors. They play a major role advocating for change within their organizations and also within the sports and entertainment industries as well. Our goal with this mini-series is to continue to educate and provide guidance to sports entertainment leaders as our board members share valuable insights and best practices. With that in mind, I'd like to introduce a good friend of ours, Kyle Ellington. Kyle, thank you for joining us today. Really appreciate you coming on for about 15, 20 minutes, just a quick conversation. So thanks for being part of this conversation.
Thanks for having me, Mark. Really appreciate being here.
So Kyle's a diversity and inclusion professional. He is currently with the Oakland Athletics. We were actually just talking about his title. He's director of diversity, inclusion, and belonging at the Oakland A's, and been there for a year and a half, coming up on 2-year anniversary at the beginning of 2023. That'll mark his 2-year anniversary. And before that, prior history with the Sacramento Kings, I think nearly 9 years there, if my memory serves me correctly, and most recently serving as the director of human resources and diversity and inclusion. And Kyle, let's jump right in. So the Kings background is a great kind of entry to this first question. Your foundation's HR, right? It's human resources. And so you came up through that background and that skill set, which has clearly evolved, right? That role and your career's evolved since then into this DEI professional. So it always goes through our minds at Prodigy of how do you make that, the differences between HR and DI, like how did you make that transition, but also the differences between those two, right? They're two separate roles, but how can they work together?
Absolutely. That's a great question. I actually get this question quite frequently. So this is a great question that you're asking me. What I really found is really what the organization, how it's structured, and how much influence the HR department has. Does the HR department have that seat at the table where they can make influence and when it comes to organizational strategy? You're seeing like the NBA league office and the MLB central office, they have a chief people and inclusion officers who oversees both HR and D&I. So you're starting to see that trend where sometimes there is leaders that are both seeing HR and D&I, but also you see it separate, where HR is a leader or in D&I. So coming from the HR background, how I kind of transitioned to D&I was that the NBA league office back in 2015, they hired a chief diversity officer, and there was his goal was to really implement initiatives throughout the organization, also down to the teams. So a lot of those initiatives fell in the HR department. And I raised my hand and said, hey, I want to be a part of those D&I initiatives. Then eventually when I got promoted to director, they added that to my title as somebody being fully responsible and accountable for all the D&I initiatives that we want to do as an organization. And then that passion just really influenced in me that I want to do this full time. So I found a role with the Oakland A's as their first ever role. And like you mentioned, was to be in D&I. So I would say the difference is when you think about HR and D&I, is that D&I is more of a business strategy as versus the HR strategy. Of course, it overlaps between recruiting, retention, training and development, as well as equity and fair pay. And HR can play a big part in championing all those initiatives. But I look at HR as really focused on the employee experience, the employee life cycle internally, where D&I can not only touch the employee experience, but also touch other stakeholders in the external experience as well for our organization, our fans, our clients, our community, how we're touching the society as a whole.
And what are your thoughts on, and that background leads to a kind of follow-up question. Are there any, we talked about in prior conversations you and I've had where DEI roles sometimes sit, what department it is, who it reports to, and I'm not kind of referencing it in the same light, but are there, when it's situated under HR, I'm sure there's many benefits. Are there any drawbacks in your opinion coming from the HR side transitioning to DEI rather than being a community person or a salesperson or marketing person and shifting in DI? Is there any drawbacks? Is it because you might be considered, kind of an HR job wrapped under that? Like, what are the negatives of coming from the HR side to DEI?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think is the negatives, maybe some of the drawbacks is that HR is more the policy compliance, kind of internal initiatives focusing on employee experience. And it doesn't really touch that big picture or stakeholder experience if you came from a marketing or community background. But I honestly see it as a benefit in the sense that I do have that experience when it comes to recruiting. It allows me to train and development. I understand the impact of the employee experience in that engaging and inclusive culture. So I could see it as definitely a benefit from the employee experience side. But when you're thinking from strategic and how it touches society as a whole, our fans and our clients, if you have that marketing kind of community or communications background, you probably have more strategic experience in those spaces.
Right. It's interesting. You mentioned I think you mentioned you were the first DEI person at the A's, but I think that also applies to the Kings too, right? I mean, like you said, 2015 was kind of when, although listen, the last two, 3 years is when they became more prominent, but those organizations that were doing it 5, 6, 7 years ago, that's where they were ahead of the game, and it wasn't reactionary to life and what's going on in the world. It was proactive. So again, I think you were the first person to hold both those DEI roles. Okay, so let's talk about that, right? The responsibility that comes along with that, being the first, and the opportunity that comes with being the first, right? I mean, talk to me about those two pieces of being the first in those two landing spots.
Yeah, I believe it comes with a ton of responsibility. I think with any new role, or specifically something that's personal as diversity, equity, inclusion, there's a lot of uncertainty and impact of what you can make in an organization. And D&I means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, whether it's representation. Different leaders may think about what diversity means, what equity means, what inclusion means, whether they have biases or not. So how do you unpack those things, transforming systems and policies and practices, and being aware of biases that are inherent in the human beings and through their experience and work experience, and how they translate to how we live our lives, how we treat others and do business. So I really think that D&I it was definitely a new role and a lot of responsibility, but I do believe there's a lot of opportunity that comes with this role. So let's talk about the opportunities. So I get to really lay the foundation of what diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging means to our organization. I get to add the business case and benefits and educate our employees, our fans, our clients, our community on what the benefits and how we can impact society as a whole. So I believe in the opportunities of creating greater innovation, more productive teams, customer retention, satisfaction, create programs and training programs that educate and bring awareness around cultural issues or microaggressions that are happening, biases that are happening within the organization, partner with our leadership team, and bring that philosophy, culture to our baseball operations staff, to our stadium operations, all departments that probably haven't even talked about diversity, equity, inclusion in their vernacular. So bringing these new topics and subjects. We're out on social media and we're celebrating days and holidays and cultural celebrations that we have never celebrated as an organization. We have an office over in Dominican Republic. We celebrate Dominican Republic Independence Day in February. That was a holiday I never even knew about. So I'm constantly learning about the cultures and the different individuals that were impacting on a day-to-day basis. And there's employees who came up to me and said, I really appreciate our organization supporting this holiday or this significant event. It means a lot to me. So those kind of small wins that I'm having now kind of brings the opportunities that we can do and create a compelling brand and really bring a place where everyone can bring their full potential to work and feel valued and welcome.
You right there talked about something interesting to me, right? You mentioned working with leadership and you mentioned the word culture, but the other comment you made there at the very end was, the baseball side, right? So the natural progression of where my mind goes when I speak with professionals like yourself is a role like yours and an impact like yours being holistic and not so singularly focused, right? Not just an HR job so we can get a talent pipeline, or not just checking a box so that we can, our community efforts are better, right? But the holistic conversation, let's talk about holistic, right? So working with all the business units from HR to sales and marketing to baseball or basketball in your prior role, why is that important? Why is the fact that DEI can have the most impact holistically, why is that important to you rather than just being such a singly focused celebrating the holidays or getting the talent pipeline going? Like, talk about the holistic conversation.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So to answer your question now, like we are really, this role is touching all parts of the business, and sports has the ability to bring people together, and they value our athletes that are on the field and what they believe in and what causes they support. So if I could bring that side of the baseball side to an importance of D&I and how much impact they can have on change and culture and sustainability, that really not only impacts the organization internally, but also impacts the organization externally. And again, you're speaking about our partnerships department, our community department, holistically, partnering with brands that really have the same values and alignment that we have. They're speaking up on social justice initiatives. I just had a conversation with our partnership department is how can we put more emphasis on D&I, what D&I programs and events that we're going to do that we want to partner with our partners. And of course, there's always that, this is the right thing to do. And but there's also that leveraging revenue and that business case of working with partners and how they see a return on investment in this space and in these initiatives as well. So I really do see a lot of synergy and how D&I can really support all business units to really help with that systematic change that is needed within an organization that may have biases or different systems that haven't been looked at from different lens and perspectives as you move forward.
You talked about the partners, right? And so the thought on my end, and this goes to the holistic comment, but I'm curious about whether it be the A's, the Kings, or what you've seen within those teams and leagues that have taken the inclusive, that the I part of it, that mindset across the other departments, right? So brands, you mentioned brands, so I can put that aside because you kind of already answered that. But and partners, I guess, or brands would be the one answer. But what about like working with vendors or other parts of the organization where there's strategies that are now in place to be more inclusive, if not more intentional about bringing in organizations, Black-owned businesses, whatever that is, to not even just vendors, but whatever that may be, different, has it been different last 2 years than it has been prior with a lot of that, the vendor, the brands, et cetera, the inclusiveness?
I definitely have seen it. Honestly, I think teams and leagues, as you mentioned, since 2020, they have put in the resources and the funds of first one, hiring roles like myself and to use our expertise and strategic mindset when it comes to supporting other lines of the business. And as it relates to vendors, that buzzword is supplier diversity. So there has been an emphasis on teams and leagues becoming more committed to the growth of small businesses and businesses owned by minorities, women, veterans, people with disabilities, LGBTQ+, you name it. Again, there's a business case for supplier diversity, adding value to align by ensuring that supplier base mirrors the community and the customers that you serve, really brings that innovation, different partners that normally want to have opportunities, businesses that normally want to have opportunities to partner with like a sports team and leagues, give them that exposure, and really just brings the economic of the community up. When you're supporting local businesses and small-owned businesses and minority-owned businesses. So there's been an emphasis there. As you mentioned before, with brands and with partners, you're seeing those D&I relationships intertwine, whether it's partnering with the HBCU Diversity Career Fair, or you're seeing a community-funded project as serving underrepresented groups. You're seeing all these different scholarships that are coming out through this process. So partners are really getting behind teams and leagues and all these D&I programs, initiatives to really bring a more equitable, fair playing field for underrepresented groups to have those opportunities, those opportunities to get those jobs out of college and really get that prosperous growth as individuals.
And I think you're right. I mean, like you said, you've seen a lot of it since 2020 to present, being a little bit more of a rapid growth on that front. And I think you would hope or argue, whether it be roles like yourself or the community or the supplier diversity or the HBCU work, that it continues, right? That's got to be once social media, quiets down or there's changes, whether it be elections or whatever it is, and everybody's happy. Well, we can't let all that work we did in 2020, 21, 22 just stop, right? It needs to kind of continue. It can't just be that, we did it because we knew we'd get a favorable public reaction by hiring this role or by going to this community event or going to this HBCU to recruit, whatever it is, right? It's got to be sustainable long term. That's got to be the hope and desire, I would argue.
Absolutely. I always say, it can't just be a moment, and it needs to be a movement. So it has to be sustainable over years and years to really see that growth and that change.
Kyle, I know we're up against the clock. I wanted to ask you one more question, though, because it's something that, again, in prior conversations, you and I have, again, more generally spoken about, not about you in particular, but we've kind of had this conversation about not just the title and not just the letters, but certainly the impact or the application of those. So in your space and searches that we've done, placements that we've had in the diversity and inclusion space, the titles have been D and I, right? And all of a sudden, then we started to, and again, rightfully so, include equity, and your title actually has belonging in it, right? So talk about those two letters that sometimes like D&I is kind of always been included, right? Now let's talk about the E and the B part of it that I don't want to say new, but are certainly not as included as much when we talk about titles or departments. We'll talk about the impact or the reasoning behind that.
Yeah, great question. You're starting to see equity, because I'll just kind of give you the definition of equity. It's that fair treatment of all individuals within the organization and system. So getting that fair access. So equality and equity are two different things. We want to make sure that I always show this perfect example of baseball fence. When we're talking about equality, where you have 3 boxes, label out there, or 3 individuals can stand on the box and watch the game. But there's some individuals who may be shorter or may have a disability, we're not able to stand over the fence to watch the game. So what the equity piece is, you provide 2 or 3 boxes so that individual can stand or provide support where they can actually see the fence, over the fence, to watch the game. So the equity is providing that fair access for everybody, regardless of their ableism or whatever experiences they may have in the organization or system. And then the belonging is, once you bring in inclusion and diversity, so you have that diversity and you have that inclusion. There's another great acronym or saying that I'm hearing in this space is, you can invite individuals to the dance, but did you ask anybody to dance with you? Yeah. That's like the inclusion piece. But that next piece of belonging, where you get that full, is that sense of feeling security and support, where there's a sense of acceptance, inclusion, and identity for that member in a certain place. So do they feel like they belong here? Yes, they may be some way of a different representation. There may be processes and behaviors in place for inclusion, but at the end of the day, do they feel belong there? Do they feel like they can add value? Do they feel like they're in a safe environment? So when you get that belonging aspect of it, that's when you really encompass that individual, feel that they can bring their whole self and reach their potential and bring their ideas and perspectives to the table without feeling any discrimination or feeling any heartache. So that belonging piece is that encompassing piece as well. So you're starting to see those titles get into the acronyms as well, because obviously diversity is important, inclusion is important, but adding that equity and that belonging piece also really captures all what D&I and B encompass.
It's a great, those analogies and metaphors are phenomenal because they apply to what you and I deal with on a daily basis in meetings, at conferences, at networking events, whatever that may be, right? I mean, are the diverse populations invited to attend? Great. That's step 1. Are they asked to participate? That's step 2. Are their opinions valued, right? I mean, you kind of go down the list of, great, we're checking off like 1 box, we're checking off the other 3 because those are more important, frankly, than, hey, you got the invite. Like there's got to be the other steps to make that, to actually accomplish the goals of a title like yours, of a role like yours. Great, we got one step done, but there's 3 or 4 other ones that need to be achieved still. So, but it's a work in progress. It's not just a title thing, which you and I've talked about. It's got to be about what comes, beyond that title and in that department of somebody who holds the E and the B letters, the equity and the belonging letters as part of your title. So
for sure. If they're belonging, like I said, they're going to be more engaged, and then they're going to provide innovation and different perspectives, so that's going to help the business needs.
Right. If you leave that out, then it's going to actually have a negative impact. It really will for them and for the organization, even if the organization doesn't realize it. So you're absolutely right. And we've talked, a lot over the years. You've contributed a great deal to our D&I board of advisors. I can't thank you enough for what you do in our industry, both in the NBA and Major League Baseball. And I know this was, again, just a brief conversation today, but along with our other board of advisors members, you offer so much value. So Kyle, thank you so much for the time today, and look forward to staying in touch.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you having me on here. I look forward to the next conversation.
Thank you, Kyle.
Thank you.